So Bill Maher on his show was asking questions about Russia and Ukraine and the war that's ongoing. And he said something that's getting quite a few headlines. So let me show you the article here. This is in Mediaite. Watch. Bill Maher asks, why didn't Putin invade Ukraine when his boyfriend Trump was in office? So I'm not going to show you the video because HBO and Real Time are massive copyright sharks, but I will read you this. So Maher says, but I know you were watching our show last week and you heard me say, why didn't Putin invade Ukraine when his boyfriend Trump was in office? I mean, Trump stood with him at Helsinki and defended him over our own intelligence agencies. So I was just asking the question, and maybe you do have an answer. Why not? When Trump was in office, it would seem to be the more logical place. So this guy, Max Brooks, responds, not to be confused with the lovely Michael Brooks, who would never say something so stupid. No, he didn't invade because he didn't need to. Because you only roll out the tanks when you think you're out of options. And Putin had a great asymmetric strategy to dismantle NATO from within. I don't know why they spelled NATO like that. And it was working when the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces calls NATO obsolete. You are on the road to a fifth column victory, and that's what he was doing, and it's a matter of fact. We know now in 2018. Thank you. Maybe, well, we know this. In 2018, Trump wanted to pull out of NATO, and it was John Kelly and John Bolton who had to hold him down like a rabid dog to stop him from doing that. And if Trump had won a second term, he would have done it. But Biden being elected caused Putin's plan to go up in smoke. So right off the bat, I do not buy that for a second, this idea that Trump would have pulled out of NATO. He did say many NATO-skeptical things, which, by the way, sort of based, but he never would have actually done it because, and we saw this on a number of different fronts, like with Afghanistan, for example. There were a number of times while he was president where he tweeted, we're moving out of Afghanistan. That's what we're going to do. It's going to be tremendous. It's going to be wonderful. And then some general would walk into the Oval Office and say, sir, we're not doing that. And he'd be like, you're right. No, we're not going to do that. That's not a good idea. So ultimately, whenever Trump got pressure from the intelligence agencies and the deep state and his own staffers, he would back down. He would back down. When he's told, like, we can't do that and we're not going to do that, he would be like, okay, I guess we're not going to do that. That's fine. There was a time, I specifically remember when he tweeted, we are getting out of Afghanistan, and then he just didn't get out of Afghanistan. Eventually, they set some sort of date. They negotiated with the Taliban, and they set some sort of date, which was after Trump was already out of office. But he never actually did it. He never did it. And by the way, Biden actually followed through on that. It's one of the best things Biden done. But unfortunately, Biden ruined it with sanctions afterwards that are now starving millions of people in Afghanistan. So it's sort of like the lowest bar of all time that you praise him for getting out if he's actually hurting civilians even more. Anyway, I digress from that point. Trump was a cuck to the deep state. All you needed was one person who was wearing an official military uniform to come in and say, sir, we're not doing that. And he'd be like, okay, no, you're right. I think you're right. I think that's a good point. And it happened time and time and time again. So he wasn't actually going to pull out of NATO. That's point number one. But point number two is this idea that, like, oh, Trump was Putin's boyfriend. I don't know why everybody overlooks what was actually happening in terms of the policy under Trump. So he didn't allow the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is something Russia wanted massively, and so did Germany. But he said no to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. He wouldn't allow it. Now, Biden came in and said, okay, sure. Now, to be clear, I was actually on Biden's side with that because I don't think it's the U.S. place to tell these foreign sovereign nations what kind of a deal or relationship they want to set up. So, but Trump said no to that, which is the harsher position against Russia, and Biden said yes to that. Now, eventually that became a point of leverage when Russia invaded, where now Biden was able to turn around and Germany was able to turn around and say, well, now we're not going to do the Nord Stream 2 pipeline because you're aggressive and you're invading your neighbor, which is good. So you had a point of leverage. If you allowed it and then you disallowed it when he invaded, you had a point of leverage, which was a good thing. But Trump said no to that. The other thing Trump did, which Obama refused to do, is arm Ukraine. He did that. Now, it also happens to be the case. Remember the perfect phone call that Trump made with Zelensky, where Zelensky was basically asking, like, hey, where are our weapons? And Trump was like, well, maybe I'll only give them to you if you give me dirt on, like, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. So he also, like, withheld some of the military support. But under Trump, before that, we had already given military support. And that's a policy that Obama didn't want to pursue because Obama viewed it as too aggressive and, you know, basically prodding Russia too much. But Trump armed not just Ukraine, but also a lot of those weapons did go to the Azov battalion. Trump was arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. That's what happened. Now, that is ripe for criticism, but nobody's making that criticism because they're too busy making this dumb criticism of, like, he's Putin's puppet. Well, if he's Putin's puppet, why were there endless, NATO exercises right on Russia's border under Trump? If anything, he was too bellicose. He was too hawkish. He was continuing the same policies of many of the previous administrations. Obama was a little more dovish than Trump on this. But, you know, you go back, like, Putin invaded Georgia under George W. Bush. George W. Bush is a neocon hawk. George W. Bush, on paper, is a lot like Donald Trump, a Republican who is not all that bright. And so the idea that, like, well, he wouldn't do it under Trump, my guess is if Trump got a second term, Putin would have still done it. That's my guess. Now, we don't know. We can't, you know, break down some sort of alternate timeline because it's just educated guesses when push comes to shove, and everybody knows that. But my guess is he would have done it under Trump if Trump got reelected. But, you know, Maher can't help himself. He always goes back to the standard Russiagate arguments, and that's what this is a standard Russiagate argument of, like, Trump is Putin's puppet. But it's also massively ironic because, hold on, if Putin invaded Ukraine under Trump, that would have been called evidence of Trump being Putin's puppet. But when he doesn't invade it under Trump, they turn around and say, well, that shows you're Putin's puppet. You're his boyfriend. So then understand something. This is a hallmark of a conspiracy theory. It's a non-falsifiable claim. If Putin does it under Trump, that proves he's his puppet. If he doesn't do it under Trump, that proves he's his puppet. Well, maybe the whole dialogue is stupid and unnecessary, and instead we should be focusing on what actually is happening on the ground and what Trump actually did and what the results of it were. But nobody wants to have that conversation. So again, my guess is if Trump got a second term, Vladimir Putin still would have done it. He probably still would have invaded. That's my guess. But certainly the claims of him being a Russian puppet or him being Putin's boyfriend, it's the liberal brainworms, man. There were so many salient criticisms to make of Donald Trump. Like, for example, stop arming neo-Nazis on the issue of Ukraine. And nobody had time to make it because everybody was too busy saying he's Putin's butt buddy. So Bill Maher, swinging and missing as per usual. His guest here, swinging and missing as per usual. And their analysis, I just think, is totally wrong. It's totally wrong. This idea that Trump actually would have pulled out of NATO, there's no way he would have had the balls to do that. There's no way. I highly, highly, highly doubt that. So there you have it. Bill Maher and Max Brooks having a stupid off on real time. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.